Okay, so, we're always diving deep here, but this time it feels especially heavy.
Yeah, this one's going to stay with you.
It really is. And, you sent this over to us, the AI recommended speech, and it's intense.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't pull any punches. It really just digs into, all the pain, all the suffering that we see throughout history, and it makes you ask,
Like, what's it all for?
yeah, exactly. Like, what are we supposed to learn from this? How do we even begin to make sense of it?
Yeah.
And then even more so, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, then that's the real challenge, isn't it? Because this speech it's a call to action. I mean, it's saying, all right, we've seen the worst of humanity, but now what are we going to do about it?
Right, and it specifically uses these really well-known historical moments of suffering.
Like, I mean, you think about the transatlantic slave trade, and you see those diagrams of the slave ships.
It's horrifying to think about people packed in like cargo.
And that's just the beginning. The
Yeah.
speech goes on to talk about the Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide and the Cambodian genocide and
Even forced internment, like the Japanese internment camps in World War II.
yeah, and all of these really dark chapters and what it's saying is that they're all connected.
Yeah, there's a common thread, and that's what we're going to try to unpack today. Like, what are the big arguments here? What's the core message, and most importantly, how does it apply to you today?
Right, because this isn't just about looking back.
Yeah.
It's about looking forward and figuring out what we can do to make the world a better place. And the speech, right out of the gate, it starts talking about this idea of dehumanization.
Yeah, and it doesn't just say that dehumanization is like a side effect of these atrocities. It's saying that it's the very foundation.
It is the prerequisite.
Exactly, like you have to dehumanize people before you can do these horrible things to them. And, we were just talking about the slave trade.
I mean, those diagrams, it's like you said, it reduces people to cargo.
And once you do that, it makes it easier to justify the cruelty and the suffering.
And we see this same pattern repeated throughout history, like the Holocaust,
I mean, they systematically stripped Jewish people of their humanity.
through propaganda, through
Yeah.
laws, through just, this constant barrage of hate.
And it made it possible for people to participate in these unimaginable acts of violence,
And the speech goes on to talk about Rwanda and Cambodia.
where, you had this othering of entire groups of people.
And it led to mass killings on just a horrifying scale.
And even in cases of forced internment, like you take away people's freedom, you take away their dignity, you basically say they're not worthy of basic human rights.
Yeah, and the point the speech is making is that it doesn't matter what the specific context is, whether it's slavery or genocide or internment, the underlying mechanism is the same.
It's about reducing human beings to something less than human, whether
Yeah.
it's statistics or economic units or, an existential threat.
Yeah, and once you do that, the moral barriers start to crumble, and it becomes easier to inflict suffering.
And what's really disturbing is that this isn't just ancient history. The speech brings up a really chilling modern day example.
Human trafficking?
Yeah, where people are literally bought and sold, treated as commodities.
Their lives, their freedom, their dignity just completely disregarded.
And it makes you realize that this cycle of dehumanization, it's still happening today.
And it's happening all around us.
Mm.
And that brings up another really important point from the speech, which is the cost of silence.
The price we pay for looking the other way, for not speaking up when we see injustice happening.
Yeah, it's like that famous quote, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Exactly. And the speech uses the Holocaust as a prime example of this.
I mean, it wasn't just a sudden explosion of violence. It was years of persecution.
Years of propaganda, of hate speech, of discrimination.
And the world largely stood by and did nothing.
Or at least not enough.
Yeah, there were certainly individuals who spoke out, who tried to help, but on a global scale.
The response was inadequate.
It was too little too late.
And the consequences were catastrophic.
Millions of lives lost.
And the speech goes on to talk about other instances where the world failed to act quickly enough.
Rwanda, Bosnia.
Places where we saw mass atrocities unfold and the international community was slow to respond.
And it's easy to look back and say, oh, well, those were different times. People didn't know what was happening.
But the speech challenges that narrative.
It says no, there were people who knew what was happening. There were warnings. There were pleas for help, but they were ignored.
And it brings up this really powerful question that's actually posed in a collage that the speech references.
Where are our leaders?
And it's a question that I think we all need to ask ourselves.
Yeah, it's not just about politicians or world leaders. It's about each of us.
It's about looking at our own lives, at our own communities, and asking ourselves, Are we doing enough to stand up against injustice?
Because silence is complicity.
Inaction is taking a side.
And the speech makes this really clear connection between these historical patterns of violence and the problems we're facing in the world today.
It's saying that the cycle is repeating itself.
That we're seeing these same dynamics play out in different forms.
Whether it's in the conflicts that are raging right now,
Or the refugee crises that are unfolding.
or the systemic inequalities that are baked into so many societies.
And the speech paints these really vivid images of suffering.
Overcrowded detention centers, families torn apart by war children caught in the crossfire.
People fleeing their homes because of persecution or violence, or just the sheer desperation of poverty.
And it asks this really fundamental question.
Have we learned from the past?
Or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again?
And that's the core challenge of the speech. I think it's saying, okay, look, we can't just keep going like this. We have to learn from history. We have to do better.
And it actually goes on to outline the consequences of inaction.
Like what happens if we don't learn from the past?
And it identifies 4 key areas where we're already seeing the negative effects of our inaction.
The first one is the erosion of human rights.
You know, if we allow violations to go unchecked, if we don't actively defend the dignity of every human being,
It becomes a slippery slope.
things that were once considered unthinkable become normalized.
And it leads to a world where abuse is widespread and justice is elusive.
The second consequence is global instability.
I mean, we're seeing this play out right now with the war in Ukraine, the refugee crisis, the economic turmoil.
When you have mass displacement, when you have people fleeing conflict and persecution, it puts a strain on resources.
It creates tension. It can lead to
And
conflict.
it makes it harder to find solutions.
The third consequence is generational trauma.
The speech talks about how the wounds of violence, of genocide, of forced displacement, they don't just disappear.
And they get passed down from one generation to the next.
And it creates this cycle of suffering that can be really hard to break.
And finally, the fourth consequence is the loss of moral leadership.
You know, when nations or individuals fail to stand up for what's right, when they turn a blind eye to injustice,
They lose credibility.
they lose their ability to be a force for good in the world.
And it creates a vacuum where other less savory actors can step in.
So the speech is basically saying that our inaction has real-world consequences.
And it's not just about the past. It's about the present and the future.
And it culminates in this really powerful call to action.
It says reserved for you.
Like, are you going to be the next victim of this cycle of violence and oppression?
Or are you going to do something to break it?
It's a challenge.
That's a wake-up call.
And it's saying that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and humane world.
And it offers some concrete solutions, some ways that we can actually start to make a difference.
The first one is education and awareness.
We have to learn about these historical atrocities.
We have to understand how they happened and why they happened.
And we have to teach the next generation about them so that they can do better.
The second solution is activism.
We can't just sit back and watch as injustice unfolds.
We have to speak out, we have to organize, we have to demand change.
The third solution is strengthening global accountability.
We need to support international courts and tribunals that are designed to prosecute crimes against humanity.
We need to hold perpetrators accountable.
And we need to end the selective enforcement of justice.
Where powerful nations get a pass while weaker nations are held to a different standard.
The fourth solution is reforming immigration and refugee policies.
We need to treat refugees and asylum seekers with dignity and compassion.
We need to dismantle these inhumane detention centers.
And we need to uphold international asylum laws.
The fifth solution is countering authoritarianism and digital oppression.
We need to protect freedom of speech.
We need to safeguard privacy rights.
And we need to combat the spread of misinformation and propaganda.
And finally, the sixth solution is shifting global economic priorities.
We need to stop selling arms to oppressive regimes.
We need to demand ethical supply chains.
And we need to prioritize development and peace building over military intervention.
So these are just some of the ways that we can start to address the problems that the speech identifies.
And, you know, it's a lot to take in. It's heavy stuff, but I think it's also really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's uncomfortable to confront these dark chapters in human history.
But it's necessary.
We can't just pretend that they didn't happen.
We have to learn from them.
And we have to use that knowledge to build a better future.
And the speech ends on this this really powerful note of hope,
It says that we have the power to break this cycle of violence and oppression,
that the future is not predetermined.
that our choices matter.
And it asks us this really fundamental question.
Will we answer the call?
And I think that's the question that we all need to be asking ourselves right now.
Like, what are we going to do with this knowledge?
How are we going to use it to make a difference in the world?
Because the stakes are high.
The future is literally in our hands.
And it's up to us to decide what kind of world we want to create.
So that's the AI recommended speech.
A powerful and challenging piece of writing.
That, I hope, will stay with you long after you've finished listening.
And hopefully inspire you to take action.
To be a force for good in the world.
To make sure that the past doesn't repeat itself.
Because we have a choice.
We always have a choice.
And the future is up to us.
So what will you choose?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time
On The Deep Dive.
Bye.